Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first episode of the Daily Adler podcast, where we're going to be interviewing Adlerians, learning a bit about them, what they think about Adlerian psychology. And we have our first guest here, Dale Wayman, who's also been a contributor to the Daily Adler email series. We're so happy to have you, Dale.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah,
This is fun, trying to figure out how we want to do this.
absolutely. So tell us just a bit about yourself, how you sort of came to be an Adlerian, what your careers looked like in
Sure, sure.
psychology. Yeah,
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that. We could get into birth order or something if you wanted to, but I
perfect.
will just slightly a little bit. But yeah, I was raised in inner city Oklahoma City. It was a very integrated community. I was the only white kid on my block,
Okay.
and so um, I learned quickly it's important to get along with people because it can be really contentious when there is a lot of diversity. But what's also nice is there can be a lot of unity
Mm,
as well. And so my father had a church in inner city Oklahoma City, and I was raised in a parsonage. And I have four siblings. They are all older. I'm the youngest of five,
okay.
and so we would around the dinner table, we would talk about these types of things. You know, the oldest act like this, and the youngest do this, and oh, you're the baby. And of course, as a baby response, I would say, I'm not the baby. I'm the youngest, and you're going to die first. Okay.
Mm,
So, I mean, that just sounds like a baby talk, doesn't it? But
yeah.
but anyway, in my family, there's like three sets of us. You know, my oldest two are like 12 and 11 years older than me, and then the next two are like 5 and 6 years older than me. So if you know Adlerian theory, that's almost like three families. So I
Hmm.
can be the youngest, or I can also be an only, if you want it to be that way. And so I did have my parents to myself as a teenager, as it was just me and my parents, and because everybody else was out of the house. And so I was raised in this environment that was where I was the minority, at least among the children, I was minority. And it was part of the busing movement at that time. It's before you guys' time, but the busing movement, Oklahoma City was one of the places that the government tried to integrate people bring people from the inner city and take them to suburban schools to
Mm,
cure racism. And it didn't work.
mm,
I mean, all it did was it created divisions in this high school. And so here I was this teenager without a really, I don't know what to say, without a home. I mean, because here I am a white kid from an inner city going to a white suburban school, but I didn't fit in with them either. And so I
yeah.
felt kind of torn between both of these. So that brought out early feelings of trying to, how can I navigate, get along with everybody? How can I cooperate? So these ideas were things that I was kind of toying with as I was growing up. But I had one particular experience with a gentleman on the same block in which I lived. He was an older guy, and he'd built a house there in that neighborhood, and so all these other houses came in after him, and other people came in, and so he saw the early people from that neighborhood kind of moving out, and then other people moved in who were different than what he was used to. And so we kind of became friends. I'd sit on the porch with him and we'd talk. And one time I went over there to talk to him. And I think I was probably, I don't know, probably 12 or 13 or so. And I knocked on his door and his screen door, and he said, "Come on in." And I sat down next to him watching TV. And he was watching Roots. And this kind of tells you where that was, because this is the first time Roots came on. They had a sequel a little bit later. This is the initial part of Roots. And he was like, those blankety blank 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 and all that blank and that. And I'm like, wow, I've never heard this guy talk like this before. And, and most of my friends are the blankety blanks he's talking about. And so I said to him, and still don't know if it was the right thing to say or not, but I said to him, I said, well, what would have happened to you if you had been born black? And
Mm,
I thought that was a reasonable question. He didn't see it as a reasonable question at all. He got really angry at me. He picked me up, and I was just a scrawny kid, and this guy's an army veteran. He was, and so he picked me up and took me to the front door, shoved me through the front door, and he's yelling at me the whole time, and he's carrying me, and he kicks me off of his porch. His foot hits my butt, and I'm landing smack
Mm.
dab on the cement, and I'm like, man, what happened? I mean, it was so fast. I was like, what happened? And and he's yelling at me, you blankety blank lover. I see who goes in and out of your house, and this is
Mm.
and I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I have not seen this before, and being a white guy, I was salvaged from a lot of racism that was going on during that time. But so it was weird to hear this, even though I kind of heard rumors of this around, but never really experienced it personally
Mm.
at this level. And so I walk home really dejected and I'm telling my mom what happened. I said, Mom, he told me never to come back. And I said, what do I do? And she said, you don't go back. And I guess,
Mm.
okay, I guess that makes sense. But that was something that really, really cemented in me because it just was so foreign to the way that I thought, because all my friends were just different races, different shades of skin, and it's like, how can you hate somebody just because of what they look like? That just didn't make any sense to me. And so that cemented in me Adlerian theory, but I didn't know it was called Adlerian theory at the time,
I
you know?
see. Yeah.
So it's the idea of equality. I think that's so, so important. So that kind of gives you a background of how I was set up to accept Adlerian theory.
Mhm.
What do you guys think of that?
Yeah.
That's
Like,
Adlerian theory can seem so intuitive once you start to
Mhm.
learn it. You hear
mhm.
what he said and you're like, oh, yeah, that makes so much sense in my life. This is
Hmm.
what happened to reinforce that idea.
Yeah, I like that word intuitive because I think that's important. It is intuitive. I mean, it just makes sense. I mean, we need to learn to get along, right?
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I
Lots
think
of themes
prejudice a
there.
lot of times, what was that?
Prejudice what?
Happens from, I think, a lack of diversity. I think a lack of
Hmm.
education. I think
Hmm.
people think prejudiciously when they haven't had exposure to any other types of thought or different
Hmm.
people. And I
Hmm.
love that Adler's big, he promoted education a
Hmm.
lot because he believed that that could prevent a lot of that nastiness from happening in the world. But it's sad as
Okay.
a child to see that from an adult.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. Because it was just completely foreign to me. I mean, I wasn't taught that way. My parents were like, hey, everybody's a child of God. We all love each other. I mean, this is just the way it is. And so we don't treat people in bad ways. We treat people with respect. And so that's just the way I was always taught. And so it just made no sense that there was people like this in the world who actually hated people.
Mhm.
It just didn't compute in my mind.
And so you have this intuition about what's right and wrong, about
Hmm.
equality and community feeling and like finding belongingness in this community you grew up in. But when do
Hmm.
you first actually stumble across Adler's ideas and sort of make that like click? Oh, this is
Yeah.
the way I've been thinking actually all this time.
Yeah. Well, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in psychology. And Adler was not really talked about much in either of those. And now, as an educator, I talk a lot about Adler. But and so I didn't, I just kind of, and I like what you said, Shay, it's intuitive. I just thought, well, that's the way life is. I mean, and so I didn't really tie it to a theory. I didn't
Mm.
really think about it in a psychological way. I thought about it in a personal way. And so then
Yeah.
I got into the PhD program at Ohio University in counselor education supervision. And there I ran into Dr. Thomas Sweeney. And it was the first class that I took at Ohio University. It was called Adlerian Theory. I'm like, I don't know what this
Okay.
is. I mean, I've heard of it, but I want to see what it is. And Dr. Sweeney, who was so amazing, such a wonderful professor, and he's explained this theory, and I'm sitting there thinking like, don't everybody already know this already? I mean, it's kind of like this makes tons of sense. I mean, this is kind of stuff we talked about around the kitchen table, around the dining room table at dinners at home. This is just it just makes sense to me. And plus, during that time also, Brady Bunch was on, and Brady Bunch is Adlerian theory through and through. I mean, it is.
Mm.
If you just look at it, it sets right up with the with the birth order, and it just goes right there. And so when Dr. Sweeney was talking, and he was doing some amazing things. He's like he had one demonstration. He brought one student up, and they were talking, and he did a lifestyle analysis with the person, and I'm like, wow, that really makes a lot of sense, you know?
Mm.
And how did he know these things about the student? He'd never met the student before, this class, and they hadn't had other talks, but how did he know this? And I'm thinking, this Adlerian theory sounds pretty good to me. So that's really my induction into Adlerian theory. I mean, to me, it's just, it makes sense intuitively, it makes sense scientifically, it makes sense psychologically. It makes sense spiritually. That's one of the things that we need to work on as Adlerians is our spiritual life. And so it all
Mm.
just kind of fit in just to the way that I see that, the way I see Adlerian theory. So that's kind of where it was. And that was back in, let's see, I'll tell you how old I am. See, that was back in 1996. Yeah, 1996, I think is when it was. So last millennium is when I met Dr. Sweeney. And one thing that he said that I thought was really cool, and I've done this with my students, is he said, I want you to come to my office. He said this not just to me, he said to the whole classroom. He says, I want you to come to my office anytime you're feeling discouraged, you're not going to make it through the program. I have my academic robe sitting on the back of my door. I want you to put that on and look at yourself in the mirror.
Mm.
And I'm like,
Wow.
I'm
That's
like, wow, that's great. Now, I don't have a physical office because I teach online. But I tell my students that I said, go look in the mirror, tell yourself, I'm going to make it through this program. Believe in yourself. And so it still brings tears to my eyes when I think about what Dr. Sweeney said because it was so meaningful that he
Mm.
believed in his students. And I think that's really important in Adlerian theory that we believe in the power of the pupil. That the pupil can do what they want to do if they get the right amount of encouragement.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
sometimes you're that person's first point of contact for that encouragement. Because
Mhm.
I know you guys have probably run into children who've never heard encouraging things from the caregivers that should be encouraging them. And so you
Mhm.
might be that difference in someone's
Mhm.
life.
You might be the only one that encourages them.
Right.
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 And Adler says discouragement is pathological. And so if we can get people encouraged, they'll be less pathological. And, encouragement then, it's not like a rah rah, I'm a cheerleader for you type of thing. It's like you have these strengths, and I want you to see these strengths, and I want you to
Mm.
use these strengths. And that's something I just recently have been thinking about. When a person has a talent, they often don't know it's a talent because it's just like normal for them. And
Mm.
so we look at them and I say, wow, you're so good at that. And they're like, really? I mean, I don't see it because it's just normal life for them. And so we're like, man, I want to be like them. I want to do what they do. But I've got my own strengths that I don't realize. And so if I'm in counseling or I'm being educated by an Adlerian will want to point that out. Look at that strength that you have, and we're
Yeah.
going to use that. In the past, I've always like, oh, I got these weaknesses. I got to concentrate on these weaknesses and get rid. No, let's operate in our strengths
Yeah.
and realize I don't have everything. You've got strengths, I've got strengths. Let's put our strengths together and let's make things work together well. So that kind of explains a little bit of how I was hooked into Adlerian theory.
Love that. Thanks. It's nice to get to know you a bit deeper today.
Yeah,
Um, and what sort of materials, like books or I suppose lectures, sort of deepened your appreciation for Adlerian ideas, where you really got to dive into the theory and maybe what Adler would have said himself?
sure. Well, of course, we used Dr. Sweeney's textbook,
Mm.
uh, Adlerian Counseling and Psychotherapy. And I think he's gone through, see, I've got his sixth edition now. I think he may even have a seventh edition. And I forget where I came in on him. I think maybe the third edition or something. But that book, Adlerian Counseling and Psychotherapy, Dr. Sweeney, it's just, it gives a really complete picture of Adlerian theory and how applicable it is at all ages and stages and situations, and also how how useful it is. And so that's the first book I usually tell students to go to. But then after that, I tell them you need to do some biographies of Adler. So you kind of contextualize him. What was he kind of like as a person? And so I like his biography that Hoffman wrote, the one that Phyllis Bottom wrote. I like that one as well. I've got another one here that I haven't finished yet, um, but I'm working on the one by let's see, Stepansky. Stepansky is a good one too.
Mm.
And so I think it's important to not only understand the theory, but to understand the man. How did the man get that way? You know, and what was going on in society that helped him to do that? Because he was featured in an article in the New York Times, I think in the early 30s or something, and it was groundbreaking. The headline is like, psychologist says men are equal to women, women are equal to men. You just wouldn't say that back then, but that was so groundbreaking, and it makes sense today. I mean, because that's what we believe today. But back then it was like, no, no, this doesn't make sense. A psychologist came all the way from Europe to tell Americans, this stuff,
And
and
the courage, right,
yeah,
to make
yeah,
a
and
statement like that.
yeah, and so it kind of you see some of that stuff like, I wonder if Adler influenced a lot of the thought that was going on, because Rogers says that I didn't realize how much I learned from Adler till later in my career. And uh, Ellis says that almost all the theories come from Adler at some point. And so these ideas of Adler, and if I recall correctly, he said something like, "I don't care if I get credit for it as long as my ideas kind of continue."
Mm.
And so his ideas are definitely continuing. And in the Supreme Court case, what is it? Topeka versus Brown, I think is what it is. And that was back in the 50s for getting integration into schools in America. Um, they used Adlerian theory in that to
He
help
was
the
cited. Yeah.
yeah, to
Wow,
help
I did
help
not know
that
that.
happen. And so it changed our educational system, made it an integrated system. And I can't say enough good stuff about the guy. I wish he had lived longer, didn't die so
Yeah.
early. But a new one that I really have been enjoying is the one by Lynn Sperry, Highly Effective Therapy and
Mm.
Effective Deep Change in Counseling and Psychotherapy. Uh, Lynn just put this out just recently. Uh, Let me look here. Yeah, 2022. It's not as recent as I thought it was, but it's 3 years old. But that's a really good book, Highly Effective Therapy. And so anything by the Sperrys is good.
They're both
You
so
know,
talented.
yeah, they
Yeah.
are. It's just good stuff. And so that's kind of what I recommend to my students. I do want to say something though that's kind of interesting. I ended up having a dissertation that was Adlerian, and I didn't really know it until later, till I got to really get into Adlerian theory and do it. In my dissertation, I I was checking to see, is there a difference between beginning counselors and experienced counselors and then like novice counselors, like somebody
Mm.
who doesn't really have formal education in counseling, but they're kind of counselor types people. And do they look at problems differently? And also how quickly do they hypothesize the person's problem? And I'm excited to say that I found no difference. That's amazing? Um,
Wow.
and so
Mm.
my dissertation advisor said this really is not very good research because you didn't prove anything. But hey, dissertations don't always prove anything. But I had one thing out of there that was really interesting that helped me to confirm some of my Adlerian thought. And the idea is that our minds are kind of like files, and so when we see a client, within just a few moments, in all three of these groups of people, within just a few moments, we're already generating an hypothesis about what this person's issues are. And we're already generating this hypothesis. Okay. And and what we discover is that novice counselors, beginning counselors, they will generate hypotheses just as quickly, but they're more likely to be wrong.
Mm.
but they're more likely to give it up, to admit they're being wrong. However, then you go to expert counselors, those who have been doing it 10 years or more, according to my study, then 10 years or more, they make hypotheses at the same rate, same speed, and they're more likely to be right. But they're less likely to give it up when they're wrong. So what's the answer for both of these things? Because we need new counselors to keep us fresh and help us think about ideas in new ways. We need older and more experienced counselors to help us to to remember, their experience and the things that they've had. And what it is our minds over years, we tend to categorize people into different files in our mind. Okay, so if a person starts a story, there's a life story, and you're like, oh, I've heard that before. And we kind of tuck that away, within that file of that story. And we may not catch the differences in that story. We also will kind of put them, and we're already figuring out how to fix them, if we can fix people. Now, what interventions we need to use. And so that's a good thing because we're usually right when we do that, but we're missing things. So we're more likely to not give it up when we're wrong. We're going to stick to our opinion. And so out of this research, then I came across this concept of what's called disconfirmatory hypothesis testing. And so disconfirmatory hypothesis testing is simply what evidence do I have that tells me I'm wrong?
Mm.
Okay, so a beginning counselor and an advanced counselor both need to think about that instead of what can I see in this person that tells me I'm right, rather than what is the evidence that they're giving me that tells me, hey, maybe what I'm thinking about this person isn't correct. And
Yeah.
that sounds like the guessing method, does it not?
Yeah.
Mm.
It does. I mean, that's an Adlerian thing. We've got our theory. We put things in, and Adler says, "Hey, this is just a theory. This is not. These are probabilities. This is what these are. So we don't want to. These aren't like set in stone. This is the way that has to be. Let's look at what information do you have there that tells you maybe you're missing something. So start guessing and try to chase those rabbits until you get to where it's not right, and then try to go another way theoretically. And so that for me was an amazing discovery. I didn't think about it being Adlerian until several years later after my dissertation. I was thinking about it, like, wow, that's Adlerian. So I did have an Adlerian dissertation that found nothing, but it did confirm Adlerian theory, not for only for myself, but it confirmed the theory itself about the usefulness of Adlerian theory in terms of helping people. So that's kind
Yeah.
of kind of where I am. Um, are there other things you want to talk about, or you think this is good enough for our first broadcast or
I have a
podcast? I don't know.
question
What are
for
these
you.
calls? Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was curious if you could ask Adler anything, what would you ask him?
Oh wow. What would I ask Adler? Huh.
Mm.
I would I play with my students about this one. I tell my students, I say, if you touch me, you'll touch somebody who touched Adler. Okay. So because I met Rudolf Dreicher's daughter. She's a professor at across the state line in Illinois. And so I met her and talked to her, and I shook her hand. So I touched her, and she touched Adler. So I tell that to my students. I don't know. What would I ask him? I think I would probably ask him, what? Well, first of all, I think I'd want his blessing. I,
Mm.
I I think I would say, and I know I'm congruent with Adlerian theory for the most part. I have my own ideas too, but I think I would want him to say thank you for continuing what I taught. And so I think I would ask him to give me his blessing. I think that's what I would do. Yeah, I say thank you, Dale, for continuing what I taught. I think that's what I would want. Yeah, I think so.
Mhm.
You're expecting some
That's
big
a good
thing,
one.
weren't you?
That's a great
Yeah,
one.
just touch me.
Perfect.
That's all I want him to do. Yeah, touch me.
Yeah. Yeah. Never wash
Idea.
that hand.
Yeah, never wash it again. Yeah, that idea. So yeah. I guess that's kind of what I want to do in that. Yeah, that's a great question. I'll have to think more about that and think about that
That's a
Absolutely.
great
later.
answer. It's a great
Yeah.
answer. And I wanted to say too, your findings are really encouraging from your
Hmm.
dissertation
Hmm.
because as somebody that's going into the field, it's good to
Hmm.
hear, hey, you're going to be wrong a lot. You're going to
Hmm.
have what it takes later, like the stuff that you can put to use later, but you're going to be wrong right now because
Hmm.
you are wrong a lot in this field of just, especially
Yes.
if you're guessing, you're throwing stuff out hoping it
Yes.
lands. You're not going to be
Yeah.
right all the time. And
We're
then
not
that's a good
afraid of being
reminder.
wrong.
Yeah. And it's a good reminder later, hey, you're going to be more biased later.
Hmm.
You need to
Hmm.
always be open to changing the course of how you're thinking or what you're thinking is
Yeah.
true or not.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
I think always double checking your biases. I think that's really important. You know,
Yeah.
and I like what Adler has. He has what's called a 50-50 rule. I may be making that up a little bit, but it's a 50-50 rule type of thing is when I enter into a conversation with you or we have a disagreement, I'm going to believe that you're 50% right and that I'm 50% right.
Mm.
So I'm not gonna
Oh,
I'm not gonna jump in and say, yeah, you're 100% wrong here. No, I'm gonna believe you're 50% right. I'm gonna believe I'm 50% right. And we can start there and we can end there. It's okay because I'm going to be wrong. No one person can know everything. And it's funny every once in a while. I mean, I'll quote, I'll put Adler quotes out there to my students and on my Facebook page and something. Every once in a while, an Adlerian will come along and say, "No, that's not quite the right quote." And I'm like, and one Adlerian was so positive to me. She said to me, she said, "You can't know everything about Adler." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's true." And she said it in such a nice way. It was really encouraging. It was like, no one knows everything. And it's okay to make a mistake and be wrong about him. And I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. Because I was like, wow,
Yeah.
did I really screw that one up? And so I appreciate that. We're not afraid to make mistakes from around areas. And you know what? Even if we're using the guessing method and we guess wrong, the client will correct us. And now we got the information we needed, right? I
yeah.
Yeah.
mean, that's
Yeah.
what's important. So it doesn't matter. And it makes us human to the client too. No, that's not the way it is. And so they don't see us as some guru of wisdom and always right, come up to the summit and, I will fill you with wisdom. It's no, we're together. We're making a relationship together and getting through this life together. So I like that. Those are great questions.
Love it. Okay. Thanks, Dale, for being our first guest.
Sure.
Roll call to all the other Adlerians out there that want to be have their brains picked by us as well.
Mhm.
Um, and we're excited to keep this thing going.